Hey guys, how's it going? So let's continue with chapter 12. So this is it, right? Chapter 12 is basically how do we carry through management, right? So basically we talked about, different aspects all throughout the course, but this is where it comes together, right? So this chapter is about performance management. And let me be clear, right? This is not just performance reviews, right? This is the system that determines whether people succeed or fail. So today we answer, how do supervisors manage performance the right way? Okay, so let's get started. So let's look at this cycle, right? Performance management includes the following, right? Setting expectations, supporting employees, monitoring performance, giving feedback, and then repeating the cycle. So the idea is that this is a cycle, right? That we go through, we set expectations, we support, we give them the tools, we set them up for success, we monitor performance, give feedback, right? And this is a cycle that continues. And the key idea is this is a system, right? This is not a one-time event. Most people think, oh, well, yeah, performance, you get judged by your supervisor through the annual review once per year. But in reality, performance is managed every day. Okay. Okay. So this is one of the biggest mistakes supervisors make, right? The day-to-day feedback, right, has to be ongoing, immediate, and prevent problems, right? And this is the day-to-day, right? Every single day, you make corrections, you talk to your employees. This is an ongoing process, right? It should happen quickly. On the other hand, you have the annual review, right? The annual review is more formal. It is sort of like a summary of performance, right? Um, and look at this rule. No surprises at the end of the year, right? There, you want to make sure that if the employee did something that he was not supposed to, that was addressed beforehand, right? You don't want to have any surprises per se at the end of the year. So it's right here. The evaluation period must be long enough to develop a true record, but short enough for useful information, right? If an employee hears something new in a review, the supervisor has failed. Okay, so why evaluate, right? What is the purpose of formal appraisals? Okay, this slide here shows six reasons, right? And just to make it short, you want to clarify expectations, make sure your expectations are clear, support promotions and paid decisions, identify weaknesses, guide coaching, provide legal documentation, show employees where they stand, right? And evaluation is not just criticism, right? It's about clarity, it's about fairness, and it's about development, right? All right. So who evaluates? Okay. There are multiple perspectives, right? The supervisor, for the most part, is the official evaluator. He is, or the primary evaluator. Um, Sometimes there can be peer-to-peer evaluation. So this is when coworkers evaluate their fellow coworkers. There's something else called 360 degree, where everybody gives feedback, right? And it's kind of like free for all. Everybody gives feedback, right? We also have self-evaluation, where you or the employee self-evaluate. You give yourself a rating. Now, each has its strengths and weaknesses, but the key is this, right? More perspectives equal more accuracy if managed correctly. Okay, now we get into how we evaluate, right? So what are we measuring, right? We want to measure quality, we want to measure productivity, we want to measure dependability, we want to measure initiative, and we want to measure teamwork. Okay. How to measure? performance standards, right? Standards that we set beforehand, right? And look at this checklist here, right? A good standard answers how much, how well, when, and in what manner, right? If a standard is unclear, evaluations become unfair. Yeah, they become subjective and unfair. Okay, so there is something called rater bias, right? And this is, let's pretend that you get rated by your supervisor and you did a great job, right? You reached your goal, or you have very good metrics, uh, but the supervisor feels that you did a very bad job, right? He might be biased, right? So there are different ways of getting those ratings wrong. The first one is they call it a severity error, right? The tendency of a rater to underrate employees or grading too harshly, right? Um, that is when they're too harsh. Okay. Then we have leniency errors, right? Let's say that you actually perform bad in that period of time, and the your supervisor is gonna give you an okay score, right? Or they're gonna give you a great score, right? And this is what we call a leniency error, right? Here it is, the tendency of a rater to overrate employees, right? And there's also called the halo and the horn effects. And I think we previously discussed this. The halo effect is when somebody did something good sometime at some point, and ever since you have that, you always think that he or she that employee has, it's a good employee, or that they perform because they did that good thing once, right? That's the halo effect. Or the horn effect is the opposite, is when this employee uh, did something bad once or didn't follow instructions. And ever since, let's say that you think that, they're not working properly or they're not following directive. So anyways, the halo and the horn effects, all of these are pitfalls, right, in evaluation. Okay. So preparing for the appraisal meeting, right? Let's say that we are close to the end of the evaluation period, and you're going to evaluate somebody, right? So this is how you prepare for that meeting. Um, Recognize what the purpose is, right? You want to recognize strengths and address weaknesses, right? Areas of improvement, right? What about the environment? Well, you have to make it private and you have to make it very professional, right? You don't want to, you know, have anybody else listen in, or, uh, uh, you want to make this private. Okay. Uh, as far as documentation go, you want to have accurate and objective documentation. The review the appraisal, right? The appraisal form for objectivity and accuracy. So before the employee enters the room, right? So you want to make sure that there's all documentation that's been properly made. And then you have critical incident method, right? Uh, Use real examples, not opinions, right? Prepare specific previously recorded examples of both outstanding and below average performances, right? If you walk in unprepared to the meeting is going to fail, right? Now, how do we conduct the meeting, right? So this is a little step by step. Um, this is the conversation itself, right? So step one, state the purpose clearly, right? Recognize the achievements first, what they did right, you know, how they're a good employee. Discuss improvements, right? Make sure to mention the areas that this employee has improved on. Create an action plan, right? If they're lacking in one area, this is how we're gonna get there, right? This is how we're gonna work together. Be honest, right? We want to be honest, but also we want to be controlled. We want to make sure that we're addressing all of the areas that he or she is lacking in. But we also want to make sure that we're not offending anybody, right? And also always let the employee ask questions, right? So give the opportunity to ask questions. And it should be a conversation, right? Not a lecture, right? So how do we close the meeting, right? How you ends really matters. Now, so for clarity, do they understand the rating? Okay. On future goals, what's next? What do we do next? We call it, next steps, right? What are you going to focus on? What's the timeline, etc. Documentation. Um, 99% of the time, they're going to have to sign the documentation. And this, when they provide their signature, this serves as an acknowledgement, not as an agreement, right? Let's say that they don't agree with the rating that you gave them, right? Well, this is not that they agree. This is just an acknowledgement that, supervisor, the manager, you know, gave this rating in this case. And, for the final note, just show support, right? Indicate continued support so that they can develop. So employees should leave feeling challenged but supported, right? That's the idea. Okay, so now we shift to development, right? So coaching, right? Everybody knows what coaching is. We've had coaches in school for sports, and this is kind of like the same thing, right? Uh, a coach provides ongoing guidance, right? Information, instructions, suggestions on how to do the job properly. Okay. And, you know, the goal, right? The goal basically prepares employees for greater depth in their roles, improve performance, reinforce positives, and correct negatives, right? And the output, right? We're talking about action plans. Coaching turns feedback into results. Now let's talk about growth, right? Promoting within the company or the organization. So there are three factors, right, that we have to take into consideration. First, we have seniority. Seniority is basically the length of service. That you have people that have been working there for, maybe 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years. Um, and this rewards loyalty and reduces favoritism, right? But may promote without regard of actual performance. But we have to take this into consideration, right? Next, we have ability, the employee's potential to perform new higher level tasks, right? So we have seniority and ability. Also, we have merit, right? Which is basically how have they performed in the past. Now, the best promotion balances all three. If you ignore merit, you're going to lose motivation, right? If you ignore seniority, they're going to feel betrayed. So we have to try to balance all of three and take all of them into consideration, right? So that employees remain motivated. All right, so let's talk about compensation here. Compensation is basically your wage, right? Or any other incentive, right? Or let's call it the reward system. One of the ways we have something called pay for performance, which is reward based on results, right? Think about well, here it says compensation beyond base wages. So think about a bonus, right? Basically, let's say you have a wage, you make 20, $50,000 a year. But if you reach the specific goal, then you have a bonus, right? This is pay for performance. And then you have gain sharing, right? Which is team-based rewards. If your team reaches a goal, per se. Everybody gets the bonus, right? And look at the supervisor's role, right? You have to identify pay inequities, recommend fair compensation, right? Compensation must feel fair. That's what drives motivation, right? So this is the final model, right? Everything is connected, right? Standards, which you define expectations, appraisals, measure performance, coaching, improve performance, and rewards, right? You want to reinforce behavior. And the one key is if one fails, the entire system breaks down. Okay. So these are some key terms. I'm going to stop here, guys, and I'll see you in chapter 13.